Hi everyone, welcome. Thanks so much for coming. My name is Hannah McKay. I am Development Officer at Rethink Priorities. For those of you who don't know, Rethink Priorities is a research and implementation group. We research pressing opportunities and then implement solutions to make the world better. We work across a variety of cause areas, one of which is animal welfare. And today you're going to meet a number of members of our animal welfare department. And today we're here to talk about shrimp farming, its scale and the diverse welfare challenges within it. We're going to start off today's session with a 15-minute presentation from Associate Researcher Hannah McKay before moving on to a Q&A. And many of you have already submitted questions in advance for that Q&A, but you'll also have an opportunity in this session to submit further questions. If you want to do that, you can do that anytime during the presentation or afterwards through the Zoom chat, or you can also raise your hand at the end of the presentation as well if you'd like to ask your question verbally, and we'll get through as many of those questions as we can. And so without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Hannah for her presentation.
Thanks, Hannah. Hopefully you can all see my screen now. Great. So yeah, hi everyone, I'm Hannah. I'm an animal welfare researcher at Rethink Priorities, and I'm going to be talking about the farm shrimp welfare work that we've been up to. And I'm going to be covering work from 4 reports that we've done, 1 of which is published and 3 of which are forthcoming. But first, just as some background context, I wanted to talk about something that we don't cover in our reports, which is the evidence for sentience in shrimp. There are 3 main types of evidence we currently have. The first is that we have evidence of nociception, which means that there is physiological processes for shrimp to detect a certain type of dangerous stimulus. So it's like when you burn your hand and you instantly pull it away from whatever burned it. And shrimp show something similar with a tail flick reflex when they are pinched. And nociception is considered necessary but not sufficient for consciously experiencing pain. Secondly, shrimp appear to show protective behaviors in response to noxious stimuli. For example, they seem to rub their antenna after an irritating substance has been put on it. And third, local anesthetics appear to reduce pain-like behaviors in shrimp. However, there are some caveats, and the major caveat is about which species we have evidence for. So this is an evolutionary tree for shrimp, and at the top in blue are the 3 most farmed species. So most of the evidence for sentient that I just covered comes from Caridian shrimp over here on the tree. But actually, the majority of farmed shrimp are pennied shrimp on the other side of the tree. And it's not that we have evidence that these shrimp are not sentient, it's just that we haven't really studied them. We don't have enough research to say one way or the other. So the case for shrimp sentience is quite uncertain at the moment until we get more research. And that brings me nicely to our motivations for our shrimp welfare work. So given all of the uncertainty about shrimp sentience, we wanted to know if the precautionary principle should apply to shrimp. So what is the precautionary principle? I'm using Jonathan Birch's definition here, which says that where there are threats of serious negative animal welfare outcomes, lack of full scientific certainty as to the sentience for the animals in question shall not be used as a reason for postponing cost-effective measures to prevent those outcomes. In other words, even if you don't know if they are sentient, if there's a risk that harms to them are really big or really bad, we shouldn't not help those animals just because we're uncertain if they're sentient. So with our shrimp welfare work, we wanted to understand if there was a chance that farmed shrimp are facing any serious negative outcomes. And we first did that by trying to understand how many individual shrimp are farmed each year. And to do that, we took data from the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations about the tons of shrimp produced globally in 2020. And we converted this into 2 metrics: the number of individual shrimp killed per year and the number of individual shrimp alive on farms at any given moment. So starting with the first one, the number killed each year, we estimated that on average 440 billion shrimp are killed for human consumption per year. And when we take into account our uncertainty, we think this figure is likely somewhere between 300 and 620 billion shrimp. And just to explain these credibility intervals in our estimations, to convert the data on tons of shrimp into the number of individual shrimp, we have to know things like the body size and weight of different shrimp species. And that's both really hard to know and really variable across individuals. So some of the uncertainty here comes from that. So how does this 440 billion compare to other farmed animals? Well, it's much larger than the number of farmed chickens, which is the most farmed land animal. It's also larger than the number of farmed fishes. and farm shrimp are only surpassed by insects in the number killed per year. Now, to calculate how many shrimp are alive on farms at any moment, we also needed to account for those that die before they get to slaughter age. So we estimated the pre-slaughter mortality rate at 3 different shrimp life stages: larvae, post-larvae, and the juvenile adult stage. And these estimations were based on various sources like books, FAO web pages, and shrimp farming manuals that quoted expected survival for shrimp at different life stages. And based on those estimations, this is what our shrimp pre-slaughter mortality rates look like. So you can see that most mortality happens in the first 2 stages, the larval and post-larval stages, and somewhere between 40 to 50% of shrimp die before reaching slaughter age, which seems very high. And we don't know for definite, but our best guess is that some of this is due to diseases, which could be because of some biosecurity problems on the farms, but also disease can be a downstream effect of other welfare threats, which I'll cover later in the talk. So once this is taken into account, our estimate is that 230 billion shrimp are alive on farms at any given moment, with a range of 150 to 370 billion. And this is more than any other farmed animal. Because insects have a much shorter lifespan than shrimp, there are far fewer of them alive at any given moment. And this metric is useful because it tells us that there is a larger scope for welfare problems for shrimp because they live longer, so there's more opportunity for welfare problems. And at any given time, there might be more shrimp experiencing welfare problems than insects. So just to recap, we were looking to understand if shrimp might be facing serious negative welfare outcomes. And when we looked at the scale, we estimated that 230 billion shrimp are alive on farms at any time, and that 440 billion are killed for food consumption each year. But maybe all those billions of shrimp are not suffering at all on farms. So next we looked to understand the welfare threats that shrimp may face. And to give you some context, let's take those shrimp life stages again. So shrimp farming also happens in these distinct stages. Eggs hatch into larvae and hatching tanks, larvae grow into post-larvae and larval rearing tanks, and post-larvae grow to the slaughter age in on-growing ponds. And these on-growing ponds, where shrimp spend most of their life, can look very different and are typically classified as extensive, semi-intensive, intensive, and super intensive. Extensive farms are usually small and made in coastal areas. They use the natural tides to bring in fresh water and feed, and sometimes even the shrimp themselves are brought in that way. These farms are most similar to the traditional farming method. Semi-intensive farms are similar to extensive, but they'll usually provide a few more inputs like artificial feed or using aerators to increase the oxygen in the pond. Intensive farms are more technologically advanced. They'll usually buy domesticated shrimps that have been checked for diseases, and they'll treat the water that they use. And super intensive farms are often inside greenhouses. They'll also treat the water that they use, and they may reuse the same water after treating it again so that they have a closed biosecure system. In general, they also have more control over the environmental variables by using things like automatic water monitors. And stocking density increases as farm intensity increases. And the reason that there are these different farm types is that people are innovating and finding ways to raise shrimp at higher densities without the limiting factors like oxygen depletion. And that's so that they can sell more shrimp. So within the farming industry, we are seeing a general trend towards intensification. So even though the majority of shrimp farms are probably semi-intensive, because more shrimp can be raised in intensive farms, the majority of individual shrimp are already coming from intensive farms. So with that context, I'll walk you through what kinds of welfare threats shrimp might face. I'll quickly go through a selection of them, but this is a non-exhaustive list. So shrimp may face water quality issues, and this means things like maybe there isn't enough oxygen in the water, or the temperature is too high or low, or the pH or salinity may be off, or there may be an accumulation of ammonia, which can poison shrimp. There is also feeding. Maybe shrimp farmers aren't feeding shrimp enough because shrimp food can be expensive. This could lead to aggression between shrimp trying to access what food there is, or in some species, it could even lead to cannibalism. And the other potential welfare issue relating to feeding is that possibly the food doesn't have the correct amount of nutrients in it for the shrimp, so it's possible they could be malnourished. Stocking density. So as we see with other farmed animals, stocking density is typically increasing in shrimp farms. It's fairly uncertain how much this affects shrimp, but a couple of studies show that in the wild, shrimp don't really aggregate much at all, so it's possible that crowding is stressing them. They may also form dominance hierarchies or fight over food, and if stocking densities are really high, there may not be room for each shrimp to rest on the pond bottom. Predators. Some outdoor shrimp farms may have ponds that are open to predators such as birds or fish if they use a natural water source that fish can enter from. Eye stalk ablation. So female shrimp that are used for breeding more farm shrimp often undergo eye stalk ablation. This is when someone removes their eye stalk to remove a gland that shrimp have there, because this makes them mature and spawn eggs faster than they otherwise would. Substrate. So in the wild, shrimp will often be found clinging to grasses or other plants on the seafloor, and some species also bury into the sand at the bottom of the sea during the day to hide from predators. On farms, many ponds are lined with plastic or concrete and have no surfaces that shrimp can climb on or bury themselves into. Transport. Shrimp often have to be transported between farming facilities and sometimes between countries. There are two main methods: transport in water, where shrimp are put into tanks or plastic bags filled with water. In these instances, shrimp are usually quite crowded. There's a lot of shrimp in each container. And if they're traveling for a long period of time, the water quality can also get worse. There's also waterless transportation. The water that shrimp are in the ponds is first cooled down to reduce their metabolism. Then they're placed on something like chilled wood shavings in hermetically sealed, aerated boxes. And this method is usually used if shrimp are being transported by plane because it's much lighter and so more cost effective than transporting water. Harvest. This is when shrimp are collected out of the ponds, often in nets. So they're being exposed to air and they can't breathe like they can in water. They may also get crushed by other shrimp in the nets. And finally, slaughter, which is usually done using ice slurry when it's done at all. So shrimp are put into something like a tank which has water and ice in it, and it's meant to slow down their heart rate until they die. However, it's fairly uncertain whether this is an effective slaughter method or not, and it could be causing shrimp pain. We're not sure. So we wanted to know how much of a problem each threat was, so that we could understand which might be the most urgent welfare threat facing shrimp. To work this out, we estimated the intensity, duration, and prevalence of pain caused by 17 welfare threats that we had identified. This is based on a method developed by Welfare Footprint, which has also been applied to egg-laying hens, broilers, and farmed fish. This can be thought of as how much pain a welfare threat causes, how long the pain it causes lasts, and how often that problem arises. And the outcome of combining these pieces of information together is the time spent in pain by the average shrimp for each welfare threat. And if you're interested in the nitty-gritty, you can see the method at the QR code just there. And I'll just explain a little bit more about how intensity is measured, because I'll be breaking down our results by pain intensity later on. This is also based on Welfare Footprints method. So there are 4 categories. The first one is annoying pain, which is aversive but does not disrupt the animal's daily routine, and the animal can ignore the pain most of the time. One up from that is hurtful pain, which disrupts the animal's ability to function, and they are aware of the pain most of the time. So the animal will probably stop doing non-vital activities like exploration, for example. Next is disabling pain, which takes priority over most behaviors and prevents the animal from having really any positive experiences. And finally, the most intense pain is excruciating pain, which an animal can't normally tolerate even for a few seconds, and they definitely can't conceal the pain. Usually, if an animal is experiencing excruciating pain, it means that they are unfortunately about to die. And now I'll show you our estimations for each of those categories, starting with annoying pain, which you can see here. So on the x-axis, we have the estimation of hours spent in pain, and on the y-axis, we have the different welfare threats. So on the top, we have no substrate, and as I mentioned, in the wild, a lot of shrimp like to burrow into the sand on the sea bottom, but in ponds, there often isn't anything that they can burrow into or cling to. And this would be how it is for a shrimp's entire farmed life, which is why no substrate is so high for annoying pain. Next is high density, which doesn't happen on all farms, but where a farm is using high stocking densities, it's probably going to remain high for most of the shrimp's life. So this is also ranking highly here. And then the next 3, low salinity, high ammonia, and non-optimal pH, are all the water quality variables we talked about, which can affect the shrimp in various negative ways. These are our results for hurtful pain, and you can see that the x-axis has changed in scale. So previously we were at a maximum of over 1,000 hours, and now we're at 400 because we're looking at much more intense pain. And you can see that some of our top ranking ones are similar, like high density and high ammonia. They're just in a different order. And these are our results for disabling pain. And again, the x-axis has changed. This time we're looking at a maximum of about 0.2 of an hour, so about 12 minutes. And now you can see that some of the shorter events like harvests are ranking higher. And finally, our results for excruciating pain. And this time, the maximum time is less than a minute. And remember, excruciating pain means the animal is likely about to die. So the things ranking highly here are instances where these welfare threats are lethal. So we're talking about toxic levels of ammonia, and with high density and water-based transport, we're looking at things like lethal cannibalistic attacks. So here are all those results together, and I've now ordered them from what we think causes the most aggregate pain at the top. And I do just want to talk about the ones that are ranking low, because these are still very serious problems, but they only happen to a fraction of the farmed shrimp population. So for example, eye stalk ablation, while horrible, only happens to female broodstock, which are a tiny percentage of the billions of farmed shrimp. We think somewhere around 0.000002% of shrimp. Waterless transportation, we think, also happens only to broodstock shrimp and those that are sold live, so also a small proportion of the total number of farmed shrimp. But your own ranking of these welfare threats will depend on things like which you think is the most important type of pain to prevent. And here you can see a breakdown of the proportion of pain of each intensity for each welfare threat. And on the right is the total hours of pain caused by each welfare threat. So when we used welfare footprints method, we also used their best practices. So we did err on the side of caution for duration and intensity. So this is almost a best case scenario. We tried not to infer a level of intensity above what we could justify from scientific studies. Also bear in mind that we didn't model any interactions between them, and a lot of these issues can co-occur. So the actual experience at any moment might be worse than, say, the annoying pain rankings. So returning to where the shrimp are facing serious negative welfare outcomes, we've seen that hundreds of billions of shrimp are farmed every year, and we've seen that each of these shrimp may be facing hours of pain from diverse welfare threats. And linking that back to the precautionary principle, we can see that the precautionary principle probably does apply to shrimp. So how do we apply the precautionary principle? Well, Birch says that we should, one, set an intentionally low bar of evidence for intervening to prevent bad welfare outcomes, and two, we should act in a timely, cost-effective manner to prevent those outcomes. So all that to say, we should start trying to help shrimp now, and we should also keep learning more about them. I want to say thank you to my colleagues Daniela and Elisa, who wrote the report about the scale of shrimp farming, and to William, who also co-authored our upcoming reports and helped with this presentation. And thanks to Vladimir and Cynthia from Welfare Footprint for developing the method we used. And we do have more work on shrimp coming up, so watch out for those. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Hannah. That was a really interesting, but also really sobering presentation. Hi, everyone. I'm Ben Stevenson. I also work on Rethink Priorities animal welfare team, but I'm not directly involved in the shrimp research. Instead, I'm here today to lead a Q&A involving Hannah and several of our other shrimp welfare experts here at Rethink Priorities. So before turning to the questions, I'd like to introduce my coworkers and today's experts. Daniela, Elisa, and Will. Do you guys each want to say hello in turn?
Yeah, hi, this is Daniela Valhorn. I'm Director of Animal Welfare at Rethink Priorities.
Hi, I'm Elisa, and I'm a research assistant at Rethink Priorities.
Hey, my name is William McAuliffe, and I'm a senior research manager here at Rethink.
Fantastic. So first of all, I'm going to ask a few questions that are based on the questions that people pre-submitted in advance of this talk, and then we'll turn to everyone who's been kind enough to appear here today for questions that you can submit now in the comments feed, or if you'd like to raise your hand and ask your question yourself, please do so as well. I'm going to direct my first question specifically to Daniela, because I know you might have to head off early in a minute. So the question is this. We've learned a lot about the high scale and the terribleness of the diverse welfare threats to farmed shrimp. So what can we do about it? What are some interventions that we have today, whether they're technological or legislative, for helping shrimp at this moment?
Yeah, so it is hard to say for sure. And the answers I might share with you today should be considered tentative because we're still looking into the tractability of how to best help a shrimp. And this is going to be part of an upcoming report on this matter. But so far, what we know? Well, regarding technological improvements, some technologies may be able to improve shrimp welfare. For example, electrical stunners. As some of you may know, the current prevailing method is immersing shrimp in an ice water slurry, which is likely a painful way to kill these animals. And electrical stunners could help in preventing some of this suffering. However, we gotta flag that this problem wouldn't address one of the greatest sources of suffering for shrimp. But starting with tackling this issue may serve to build some traction for more ambitious welfare improvements in the future. And another possibility from the technological side of things is water quality tracking or other types of tracking with the help of some applications or monitoring tools. For example, to spot early signs of disease outbreaks, which are a major cause of early mortality rates among farm shrimp. And third, we can also think of the development of pathogen-resistant strains of shrimp. However, having shrimp that are more resistant to disease probably may lead producers to increase stock densities, and more crowding may have other undesired welfare effects. And also other technologies could have unknown effects on welfare that I believe should be further studied. And if you're interested in this, Shrimp Welfare Project recently wrote about how we are currently at a turning point in the industry's development, because the shrimp industry, unlike other forms of aquaculture, has historically relied less on technology, and this is currently changing, which might create some opportunities to say the industry into a form of path dependency on higher welfare technologies. However, the technological development of the industry is also incentivized by a trend towards intensification. So this could have other undesired effects on shrimp welfare, and more research is needed into the effects of such new technologies and the cost effectiveness of eventually advocating for them. And as for the policy side of things, unfortunately, shrimp currently have little or no legal protection. There are 3-4 countries where they do theoretically have some sort of protection to our knowledge. Those are Australia, but just in some territories. Second, Austria, then Norway and Italy, but just in some localities, and not de facto, since the protection is aimed at practices that do not apply to shrimp sold in that country. But this pieces of legislation, while cover shrimp, they do not prescribe any specific measures to actually protect them. So while they are legally covered by this pieces of legislation, in practice, this may not translate into any relevant welfare improvement, or just to some, not to a significant degree. And similarly, in the UK, shrimp were recently recognized as sentient as part of the Sentience Act, but this has not led to any bills protecting these animals. Some policy that we have in the EU is that eye sock ablation is banned, but just for organic production. So there's a lot to do on the policy side of things. In the European Union, as people may be aware, we are currently going under the revision of the animal welfare legislation in the continent, and the European Commission should mandate in 2028 a new scientific opinion on the welfare of some invertebrates, including decapods, and we got to make sure that shrimp are also included. And additionally, 2 Latin American countries are considering legislative proposals that cover various aquatic animals. They talk about decapods broadly and crustaceans, so they could cover shrimp. Those bills are in Chile and in Ecuador, but it isn't clear whether those bills may succeed.
Fantastic. Thanks, Daniela. That was super thorough. Seems like there's a lot of opportunities for shrimp advocates, but obviously the flip side is that means there's a lot of challenges for shrimp as well. Hannah, thanks again for the actual presentation here. And I was wondering if you could speak in a little bit more detail about the actual moment of slaughter and the welfare challenges of that.
Yeah, sure. So the slaughter method that we evaluated in the model that I showed in the results was ice slurry, where shrimp are taken out of the pond and submerged in water which has ice in it. And from the current research, it's not entirely clear if this is a humane method of slaughter. It is possible that shrimp are suffering. But then the other big issue, welfare issue at the time of slaughter, is that some farms have really prolonged harvest times. So the time between shrimp being taken out of the pond and being slaughtered is so long that shrimp might actually be suffocating until they die. And we've also heard instances of some farms that just don't slaughter shrimp, and they just put them in containers with ice in them and send them off for transport. So they're also likely suffocating. So the humane alternatives very likely depend on the current method that a farm is using. It's possible that on some farms, just implementing an ice slurry slaughter straight after shrimp are taken out of the pond would be more humane than an existing method. But as Daniela just mentioned, there are also now electrical stunners, and Shrimp Welfare Project are trying to provide more farms with these stunners in the coming year. So I would recommend taking a look at their website and their efforts there too, if you're interested.
Awesome, thank you. I'll direct this question to Elisa, because I know you've handled a lot of the research on this. What can you say about the state of the industry, and in particular, which countries are the biggest producers and biggest consumers of farm shrimp today?
Sure. Yeah. So in terms of the top producing countries, according to FAO numbers for 2021, the top 5 countries, which altogether produce about 80% of the world's farm shrimp by weight, were China, India, Vietnam, Indonesia, and Ecuador. So there's not one country producing overwhelmingly more than others here between these 5 countries, especially if you take into account the possible over-reporting by China to the FAO, which is something that Rubber Bank expert Gorjan Nikolic has worked on. So there are important discrepancies between China's official production as declared to the FAO compared to the estimates produced by this expert in his annual farm shrimp production survey. It's for 2021, Nicolic's estimates were half what China declared to the FAO. And in terms of the top consuming countries, it's pretty hard to say for farm shrimp specifically, because the data that we have is for consumption for all types of shrimp. So the following shouldn't be construed as hard evidence of consumption trends for farm shrimp specifically. So I'll distinguish between total consumption in net product weight or live weight, at the national level, and the per capita consumption by weight. So in terms of total weight consumed per country, either in net product weight or live weight, it's likely that China is the main shrimp consumer and that the US is second. And in terms of per capita consumption, well, this is higher in high income and historically important shrimp consumer countries like Japan, the US, Canada, and European countries. But this per capita consumption is not expected to increase much more in these historically important shrimp consuming countries, but it is expected to increase in emerging countries and especially China, whose per capita consumption is in fact growing. But yeah, and again, this is all pretty tentative as concerns farm shrimp consumption specifically, because these numbers are for all types of shrimp consumed.
Fantastic. Yeah, really insightful and frustrating that in lots of ways the data isn't out there. You touched like a little bit on patterns of consumption there. Is there anything else that we might need to know about how we expect future consumption to change, or is that sort of the state of what we know so far?
So far what we've done is like shallow investigations into different like parts of the industry. So like the general economy and market of shrimp, and then like the general trends that the industry is going through and things like that. So like, of course, more research is needed on this topic, and we might uncover new data and new things as we go on to write the report that we'll be publishing in the upcoming months on the trends that the industry is going through. But in terms of like to answer your question though, about how we expect consumption to evolve, a clear trend that we've been seeing is that the demand for shrimp is increasing globally, and well, mostly thanks to these new markets in Asia, Africa, Latin America, and the development for like niche markets for specific types of shrimp, like organic shrimp or sustainably farmed shrimp. So overall, like the industry's volume has been increasing continuously for the past 20 years. Since then, it has more than tripled. And we do expect that with the intensification that the industry is going through, and the fact that it's adopting new like sustainable and responsible farming colors, well, through all that, we do expect that the industry will probably continue to produce more and more shrimp. Yeah.
Excellent.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, seems important to head off the welfare challenges as soon as we can. Will, I'll direct this question to you, and this is the last of the sort of pre-submitted questions before I'll run through questions submitted in the comments thread, and if anyone wants to use the raise hand function to ask their own question. So Will, so far we've talked principally about farm shrimp. Do we have any plans at Rethink for working on wild shrimp, or do you have any thoughts to share about wild shrimp generally?
Sure. So Daniela and Elisa's initial report on this topic on the number of shrimp did cover wild-caught shrimp and their abundance. So I recommend people check those numbers out. And I do think Hannah has a supplementary slide on it if we wanted to bring it up at some point. We don't have any short-term plans to work on wild shrimp at this moment. Not because it's not important, but we just have several reports left to go on farm shrimp, and it's something we want to dedicate our attention to. In the short term, my understanding is that our colleagues at Animal Ask are working on a report related to wild-caught shrimp and what sort of advocacy might be available there. So I recommend looking out for that. Can't speak to the details of that, but I'm sure it'll definitely be worth reading. But so those are our plans for now. It's something that's certainly on our radar, but it's not in our current short-term plans.
Excellent. Thanks, Will. We have, I think, about 10 minutes left in our scheduled time. I'll start reading through the questions in chronological order that have been written into the comments now. And again, if anyone wants to raise their hand to jump in at any point, please do so. So I believe the first question that was submitted comes from Jonathan, who asks, why is eye stalk ablation ranked low in estimated hours of pain, which is independent from the number of shrimp subjected to it?
Yeah, so this is to do with how the metrics that we were trying to come out with. So we wanted to understand the hours of pain caused to the average shrimp so that we could compare between welfare threats. So we estimated the duration for each welfare threat, and then we weighted that duration by how many shrimp it affects. So the hours for eye stalk ablation were then weighted by that 0.00002% number, which is why it ranked so lowly on our ranking. So yeah, hopefully that answers your question.
Perfect. Jonathan, if you do have like a follow-up or anything, please feel free to unmute and jump in. If not, I'll turn to Kevin's question. The survival rate for shrimp to slaughter of around 50% does seem really low. Do you have data on the survival rate of other farmed animal species for comparison? Hannah?
Yeah, great question. We actually have an entire report coming out on this, hopefully in the next couple of months, and we will be comparing it to the survival rates of other farmed animal species. We're hopefully going to look at chickens, fish, and maybe other farmed invertebrates, but we've only just begun that analysis, so I don't have any results to share now, but our suspicion is that shrimp pre-slaughter mortality will be higher than those other species.
Excellent. Okay, second question from Jonathan here, and I see a couple raised hands now, so I'll turn to those in a second. Given that ice delays decay, is ice slurry actually used as a method of convenience, which does not actually promote welfare? Ice slurry has been reported to prolong suffering in fishes.
Yeah, my understanding is that it's used separately from trying to keep the shrimp fresh, because the farms will often also have ice chips in containers for transportation. And I think that's why, yeah, so some farms don't use ice slurry and just put them into those iced containers. And my understanding is that it's actually relatively hard to get ice in the tropical countries that shrimp is farmed in and keep it cool for long enough. And that might also be why some farms aren't slaughtering shrimp that way. So I'm not sure if it's a convenient method for them, given the climate that they're working in. And I think, yeah, mostly the ice slurry is separate from the ice that they're transported in.
Okay. Last question that's currently in the comments is from Camille, who asks what I think is a really important question. If the majority of the production and consumption is happening in China, what can really be done in terms of policies? Is there like any shrimp welfare activist groups set up in China at present?
I can take this one. I'm not aware of any activist groups currently working on shrimp in China. There are actually quite few activist groups working on shrimp at all. So yeah, unfortunately, we don't have one in China that I know of. But if you do know of one, I would be very, very happy to hear about it. So please let me know, let us know. That would be great.
Yeah, I thought you'd solved it for us.
And in terms of what could be done in terms of policies, I'm afraid I don't know either. I have little knowledge about policy making in China specifically. So I wouldn't be able to answer here.
Excellent. Thanks, Elisa. I'll pass the mic over now to Jenna.
Thanks, Ben, and thanks very much for the presentation, Hannah. It was really interesting. I was just wondering if at any point in the process so far, and I appreciate, there's more research to be done, if there'd been any engagement with industry at this stage, and if so, kind of how transparent they'd been with practices and with data, or how receptive, I guess, they'd been to the idea of improving welfare in the industry, given that that probably incurs costs and stuff.
Yeah, so we haven't engaged with industry directly. Most of our understanding of the industry has come from Shrimp Welfare Project, who have engaged with some farmers directly. And our understanding is that they're usually quite open. They're usually quite proud of their shrimp farming, and surveys show that many of them also think that shrimp can suffer and things like that. But yeah, we haven't done any of that engagement directly. It's mostly through Shrimp Welfare Project.
Excellent. I see one last hand raised, but if anyone else has a question, please jump in. I always feel like Zoom is glitching on me somehow, but for now, I'll turn to Mahi.
Yeah, thanks, Ben, and thanks everyone at Rethink Priorities for this work, and also great to see some familiar faces among the attendees list and some familiar names. So I'm wondering right now what a good ask for corporates could look like. And while listening to your presentation, Hannah, I thought maybe it could be a good idea to ask, for instance, retailers to set goals for lowering mortality rates. Do you think that would be a good approach, or do you have any other ideas for good asks for companies?
I'll jump in, but definitely anyone else feel free to add on. I think the lowering mortality rates, at least on the face of it, sounds great. So I certainly wouldn't oppose that. I think in terms of what particular changes one might ask to help achieve better outcomes, I think stocking density could be one of the more fundamental issues at hand. And that's for a few reasons. One is that, as Hannah mentioned during her talk, many other welfare improvements are sort of for the means of eventually increasing stocking density. So water quality improvements that are happening on more intensive farms, those aren't happening for no reason. They're happening because they enable increases in stocking density. And so even if the problems that occur with water quality at higher stocking densities were to be somehow solved through just ultra advanced water quality monitoring, there would still be the other issues with stocking density that Hannah alluded to. And in our estimates of the model, we only gave credit to stocking density for those unique issues. And nevertheless, it still appeared to be one of the most impactful issues in aggregate. So I think as the industry intensifies and as it addresses some of its other welfare issues, in order to make sure that those improvements are actually a gain overall, at some point we need to be limiting stocking densities so that any gains that we get in other areas aren't erased by sort of the downsides of crowding shrimp. So I think possibly a good ask, and this is something we're thinking of looking into more, is to try to find some evidence-based recommendations for at what density is both consistent with good shrimp welfare and is maybe still profitable for producers, and is an ask that they might be open to considering. So that would be, I'm sure there are many other good asks out there, but I would just throw that one out as like a potentially high priority.
Yeah, sounds good. Will, I don't know if you want to pick up this question also that comes from Sophia that seems sort of pretty linked to what you just said. If I'm aware by the way, everyone, that we've hit our sort of 45 minutes. So if anyone needs to drop off, please do so. But I don't know if Will or Hannah or Lisa, you want to pick up on this question. If we lower mortality rates without addressing the other welfare issues, wouldn't we just be exposing more individuals to a longer life of suffering and therefore increase suffering overall?
Yeah, so that actually was part of my hesitation in unequivocally approving of lower pre-slaughter mortality rates. On the other hand, because a lot of the mortality, as Hannah mentioned, is happening early in life, it is very cheap for producers to like replace early life mortality by just sourcing a greater number of eggs. So I don't know that say like maintaining or increasing pre-slaughter mortality would actually like reduce suffering during life. It would probably just increase the number of like farm shrimp that come into existence. So while I certainly agree that it has to be considered whether actual reductions in pre-slaughter mortality are resulting in like good lives for shrimp that we would be okay with, probably like in the longer term, a reduction in pre-slaughter mortality would mean that the early lives of shrimp are better than they were before. And so those can be paired with like other welfare improvements, then the reduction in mortality might be overall a good thing. But I do think like aiming at reductions in pre-slaughter mortality per se without considering like the broader context in which it's happening, I do think there is a risk thing.
That makes total sense. Thanks, Will. I think we've now exhausted questions and we've sort of hit our 45-minute mark. So I'll wrap things up here, but I'd like to first of all invite everyone in the audience today to fill in a post-attendance survey, which Hannah T is about to send. There it is. We at Rethink would really appreciate you filling this in. It's honestly like a really, really short Google form, and it will be super useful information for us to inform future webinars similar to this one. And before everyone leaves, I'd like again just to thank Daniela, Elisa, Will, and especially Hannah for not just answering your questions, not just running through this really excellent presentation, but also doing all the initial background work and the long haul of the research to get us to this point to all learn from them and to hopefully improve the lives of shrimp out there. So thanks, everyone. Yeah, and thanks everyone in the audience also, of course, for attending, and hope to see you all at future Rethink webinars to share more animal welfare updates. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Ben, for hosting.